Here we have a 1951 Chief. It's a fresh restoration. It's coming for service work. Unfortunately, there's a lot of things that have not been done properly on it. The hydraulic front end on these things is real critical. I mean, it works really good, but the setup and execution of the rebuild and assembling of them and fitting them to the bike and the fender, there's a lot that comes into play. First off, these ones here are real stiff. Little tip off you got to watch out for. You can see the fender mounting brackets, they're being welded on. The only way to weld these on, it has to be silver solder. Silver is low temperature heat, and it doesn't create any distortion in the tube itself. So when you weld on this, it's going to distort the tube, and there's a bushing that runs on the inside, and it's not going to be running, it's actually going to have a stiff spot in it. So here's the other side. Likewise, you can see this turd welding, and that's a tip off that you've got distortion in the tube. So the only way, first off, you've got to line hone those, or if you got a reamer that goes the whole length of this, the inside diameter here, the tubing, and it's actually going to machine all that out, or move all that out to the same diameter all the way down through where the bushing runs. If you're looking at buying an Indian, or you've recently taken possession of one, just take some little visual cues. Here we've got a bike that's freshly restored. It's actually cut some grooves into the sidewalls of the front tire. Actually that bad that it's actually, you can actually see these little nubs here. And what that's from is from, actually the tire is centered. Now, if it was on one side, it could be because the tire is not centered between the fork legs, which in this case it is pretty well centered. The other thing it is going to be from, it's from the fender trim bolts themselves. They go all the way around the inside, and where they line up with the tire, sometimes the studs are actually sticking out way beyond this. You actually have to cut it back so it's flush with the end of the nut. The other issue is, in this case, the fender has actually got a big whoop to do, and it's pulled in. So there's distortion in the fender, which is made it run real close to the tire itself. And then again, sometimes on some tires you get on the market, the lesser quality ones, even though they're actually have a name on them, they're reproductions of some originals, they are grown oversized. So there's less fudge factor in it. There's some specific tires that we just stick with, that we know are good quality tires that nobody has any problem with, rather than some of these other tires on the market. They may look cool, but they've got deficiencies in them. The other thing that comes into play when you're tightening up the axle, that it's actually pulling, you got to be careful that it doesn't pull the bottom of the fork legs in. You want to make sure that the fork legs are actually in their natural position, because once you pinch it in, you're actually making this in the form of a U, you see, and bushings and shafts. It's a 40mm tube in these things, which is about just over inch and 9/16. So you're not going to move that, so you get binding that way as well. So that's really important. Fender mounts, when they're bolted up to the fender, sometimes you may have to put spacers in there, because you don't, once again, you don't want to pull these fork legs in to the fender. Even though the fender itself is sheet metal and you'll be pulling it out some, there's still going to be tension on it, and you're going to create this to go on the, you're going to bend the tube slightly, so in the form of a U. So this front end here has a lot of stuff going on that you've got to be pay attention to. Even the fork tubes, put those between V blocks. So that'd be the main tubes up here on the inside. Make sure that those are straight. Put them between V blocks, put a dial indicator on them, and just make sure they're true. It's an automatic replaced item with us. The ones we got are hard chrome, so they're going to last forever. Also, while at it, make sure you use up here on the lower leg the correct seal. The seal we have is a proper fork seal. Everyone else sells a automotive seal. Automotive seal is designed to run round and round and round. The shaft here goes up and down. So it's a linear motion. It's two different designed oil seals. The ones we have are specifically fork oil seals. They work terrific. They will not leak. This is to show the correct and incorrect seals that go on the hydraulic front ends. This one here is the incorrect one. This is an automotive seal. Looks like this. And this will not properly seal on a hydraulic front end. What it's designed is on an automotive application or industrial for a shaft that goes around and around like so. This is the one that's a proper one for a fork. So it's got special wiper seals on the inside and outside as well. So it seals on the inside and outside. And this is to take a linear motion, which is up and down. These ones here, the only place you'll find these ones are at Kiwi Indian. Everybody else sells an automotive one. Yeah, generally they don't seal. But this one here is a proper fork seal and does the job perfectly every single time and will not leak. Even years down the road, it will not leak. Check the fork tubes for trueness. Put them between V blocks. Rotate the tubes. And you should be within a couple of thousandths. Now, if these are bent at all, don't even hesitate to replace them. This fork tube is bent. It's about 50 thousandths of an inch, which is getting pretty close to a 1/16 of an inch. It's definitely rejected. The bottom leg is where we normally see most of the problems associated with hydraulic front forks on 50 to 53 Chiefs, other than bent tubes. But there's a lot going on with the lower legs. In this case, the tab is being welded on, the fender mounting tab. It should actually be silver soldered on. That's low heat and it's not going to create any distortion. So what happens is this is actually going to have distortion in this part of the tube, and therefore the bushing will not go back and forth in it freely. It's going to be going to have tight spots. So that, checking for that, check for oil, the oil seal groove, the snap ring groove. If it's boogered up, you can get something like a Dremel and a cutoff wheel, and then you can actually sit it in there like so, and then just true up the groove. In order to check that the lower leg is true and things are going to slide nicely inside of it, this is the lower bushing. It's actually a press fit onto the end of the leg. So this actually will press onto the leg to about so. If it's loose, you probably got a bad reproduction. If it's not tight, not real tight, you can put it on with some green Loctite. but it should be an interference fit onto the lower leg. So that's what the lower one looks like. Just presses on to about so, and that's the finished product. And fit that, slide that down into the leg all the way to make sure it operates nice and smoothly all the way up. And while it's in there, now slide this down into the lower leg. Now this shouldn't be a tight fit into the leg. It's just going to be a net fit, so you can just lightly push it in and pull it out. But this here, sometimes you have to hone them out a little bit to get a nice smooth fit over the shaft or over the tube. You've got manufacturing tolerances there on everything, so but just make sure that it operates all nice and smoothly. That's really important, because if there's any, if you think it's going to get better, it's got a tight spot, you think it's going to get better, it's not. And once it's on the bike, you're going to be going down the road, and it's going to be like a stiff front end, like a rigid front end. So take your time, pay attention to all the little details. Assemble the dampener tube to the lower leg. Sealing this gasket on the bottom is really important, and use a good quality sealant. We use a Yamabond number 4. Put plenty on it, put it around this surface here, put the gasket on, put a bunch more on this side. It's actually going to seal down on the inside of the leg, right down on this end down here. It's got to be sealed real well, so make sure everything's free of oil before applying your sealant. You don't want to leak here. That's a major issue otherwise. But anyway, put plenty of sealant on it, then fit it down into the leg. It's going to be all the way down like so. We made up this special tool. It's hollow on the end. As you can see, the end of the dampener rod has a slot in it for a screwdriver to stop it from turning. So once it's put in here, there's going to be a split lock washer and a nut. It's going to be up the hole there. So therefore, we use this tool here and stop it from turning. We can put a screwdriver down through here and do that nice and tight. Once you've got the dampener rod assembly into the lower leg and sealed into place and the nut tightened up, you're going to fit the cushion O-ring in, which is going to fit all the way down and sit in the bottom of the leg. Then you're going to fit the spring over the dampener rod assembly. Making sure it goes all the way down, because it actually wants to stop on part of the dampener rod assembly. Just make sure it goes all the way down. Then fit the flat washer over the dampener rod, and then the spacer tube over the rod. Then the special little tool we make up, it's got a 1032 thread on this end. It's about a foot or so long. Just screw it into the end of the dampener rod, and that's actually going to hold things up. It'll come into play a little bit later on. Now, since you've already done a dry fit of the bushing into the lower leg, hold the leg upright. The best way is actually you can clamp it here in a vise. Hold it vertical, and then pour in 8 fluid ounces of 30 weight oil. and that's in a dry, newly rebuilt fork leg. Now if you're servicing it on the bike, it's going to be 6 fluid ounces. Now before you start this process, just make sure that the drain plug is in. Take the upper tube and slide it into the lower leg. And once it's in place, you'll fit the bushing. The bushing is just going to be a nice slip fit into the lower leg. Next will be the seal. This is the underside of the seal, top side. So just so you understand, I can see it, that's the top side. It's going to sit in there like so. Next up is the felt wiper. So it's just really a dust wiper. It's wiping the dust off. You've got a flat washer and the snap ring. Now sometimes the felt has to be thinned down. It's going to vary to fork, or felt to felt, because the felts come in different densities. So just get a razor blade and take a slice off the felt. Use a sharp razor blade. This is the way all this assembly goes together. This being the lower side, so from the sitting on the seat of the bike, it'll be this way, looking down on it. Now the reason why this dampener rod is fitted in here, or the actual little dampener rod tool, is it's threaded into the end of the dampener rod, and you actually see it's got some flats on there, and that's because it's going to go through the end of the fork tube, and this is actually going to be the finished product there. So this little rod here actually yanks it all up enough, so it's actually going to pull it all up through the fork tube itself. Now it's a special nut that's used. It's going to go on the end of the dampener rod. It's actually a cylinder base nut. It's not a regular hex. It's actually 3/8 24 thread with a 1/2 inch hex. Normally the nuts have a 9/16 hex. That won't work, so it's a cylinder base nut. It's special, that works, that fits in there. It is important to add the oil at the point that I've mentioned in the video. It can be done later on. It's going to take you about an hour a fork leg. So rather than just dump a whole bunch of oil in there, and it's 30 weight fork oil, not regular engine oil, it's fork oil, you can just dump it in there real quick, versus if you do it later on, it's all you gotta put that little rod, actually that rod extension on it. You've got to undo this nut, and it's got to go down a little gap between the shaft and that hole there, and it's going to take you at least an hour a leg. So it is to your advantage to do it at the time that before you put the seal into place. Before putting the legs into place, you got to get the upper dust covers into place. You've got a grommet that goes on the top, and then there's a felt that actually goes up here and sits on top of the lower tree. So this felt is quite an important piece. And what that does is it actually centers the dust cover, so it's actually going to be an even distance all the way around here. So you've got to play around with that a little bit. slide it on like so. Fit the lower leg assembly into the upper and lower trees and the upper dust cover. Just slide her in and go through the felt, lower tree. It's going to go all the way in until the tube nestles all the way into the upper tree, and tighten the upper dome nut. And then go tighten the lower triple tree clamp bolt. Once you've got the forks mounted to the bike, the fender mounting to the forks is critical. Some fenders or some year bikes are going to require a spacer between the mount and the fender. Some don't. But whatever you do, you don't want each fork leg to be pulled in like so, because what's going to happen is the fork leg's going to become bowed. They have to be dead straight in order for them to work properly. So even putting the axle in has to be in a relaxed state. So once again, when you're putting the axle through, you can't be pulling the fork leg in. So if you need to put a spacer or something there, by all means do so. But it's got to be, the forks have to be in a relaxed position and operate in a dead straight plane. So as you can see through all this, the forks are a very, very critical piece. Even though they look simple, there's a lot of things that I've given you the insight to do to make them right. Fork springs, there's some shitty reproduction ones on the market. Get the right ones. Well, that's what we supply, is the right ones. So all these little things that make a difference. I can't tell you how many bikes come in here, hydraulic front end bikes, that come in here and they don't operate properly. You know, people put a lot of, well, they think they put a lot of effort into it, but it's something that you've got to put a lot of time. It does take a lot of effort, a lot of patience, but the more time you put into it, the better the end result, and you'll have an extremely nice riding bike. And there's nothing more pleasurable to ride a hydraulic front end that rides really, really nice. I mean, it is king of the road. It is the Roadmaster, and it is king of the road. But it's all these little things that you got to do to really make it all happen.